Hi, Glenn. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing, Adam?
Oh, perfect. Yeah, lots of Java, so I'm doing good. And you? Still Java?
I've been retired for 8 years now, so I'm not doing a lot of Java except for personal projects.
Yeah, exactly. This is my secret plan. If I'm retired, I will do more Java.
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with my other hobbies in retro computing. So, for example, I'll write things that allow me to connect to a Commodore 64, and Java is the right tool for the job, of course.
Hey, cool. So now, back to retro. Now back to the serious side of life. What was your first computer?
The first computer I owned was a Commodore 64.
Okay. And what is your first contact with a computer?
Actually, I think it was back in the late 70s when there hardly were computers. And I went to a Radio Shack store and saw a computer there that was running an astrology program. And I was very,
Astrology, you say? Astrology.
yes, and I had studied astrology for years and I knew everything really well and I knew my chart like the back of my hand. So I keyed in my information 9:23 p.m. Central Standard Time and so on and so forth. And it came up on the screen and I looked at it and I double checked it with what I knew in my head. And sure enough, the numbers were right.
Wait a sec. Astrology or astronomy? Because astrology.
Astrology. Astrology. Yep. Yep.
But astrology is not a science, right? This is more like
You can argue about that all day long, Adam.
no. I'm just because I'm just thinking. So astronomy is the science about planets, and astrology is like the science of mapping human beings to planets, right? So am I right?
Yeah, yeah. The difference with
Okay.
astrology is that you do all the calculations as though Earth were the center of the universe, and you're measuring the angles between the planets with Earth as a vertex.
Okay. So this is something different. What I thought it is. You make the first contact with something in Radio Shack. What was it?
Oh, they had their own kind of computers here in America called Tandy, and they were not very good, quite frankly.
Okay.
So I never owned one myself, but just walking in that store and oh, look, a personal computer. I've heard of these, right?
But was it Z80 or was it what CPU was it?
Oh gosh, I have no idea. I
But
really
you are
don't.
a retro computer specialist, so what's wrong with you then?
What's wrong with me is that I like good retro computers, not
Ah,
tank.
okay, okay. But this computer came up a couple of times. So it seems like it was a very popular computer back then. And I have a question about Radio Shack. Was it Radio Shack more like a specialist store? You like Radio Shack, or was it more like store which was not that good? So was it like boutique shop or more like mainstream shop with lots of stuff in it?
Well, in those days, it was mainly for finding parts, and you would go there, and
Ah,
if you needed resistors or whatever, or if you needed vacuum tubes, that's where you would go. And it was mostly parts, and you wouldn't buy whole finished
okay.
electronic products there. But that changed after a while, and they started selling stereos and computers and
Ah,
more.
okay. So I think back then was more like a club where you can meet like-minded people, right?
Well, you would see interesting people in there, that's for sure. Yeah, you would
Okay,
see
cool.
other enthusiasts.
Yeah. Okay. And one question. I remember you at Java One, and you were always a leather jacket with Duke on it. You're the right person, right?
I had, yes, back in the day, Sun Microsystems, of course, had an online store, and you could buy all the Java
Yeah. Yeah.
swag, and that's where I got that jacket. So yeah, I always wore that to the shows. I had the black leather jacket with the gigantic Java logo on the back.
Yeah, Java, exactly. So
Yeah.
you are the right person I invited. I was a little bit afraid, you're not the person with a leather jacket, but now, we can keep talking. Otherwise, I will, cancel the show.
Yeah, it was me, all right.
Perfect. So, what happened after the astrology experience with the Radio Shack?
Well, I was originally trained as a musician, and that didn't really work out for me, and I just didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, and I was always fascinated by technology, and I thought, well, I'll go to school and learn computers.
Which instruments can you play actually?
I studied the piano.
Okay.
Yeah, and my expertise was early 20th century music, Scriabin and Schoenberg and all that kind of good stuff.
Okay. What is it? Is this more like is it like classic or what? More like classic, more like rock, or more like how can you
I was
imagine?
more interested in the in classical music, but the modern classical music, 20th century music, and so forth. And so I was always a little bit kind of on the edge, and I eventually.
Maybe is it similar to like Ludovico and Audi? You know the guy? Is this a
Who?
Ludovico? Ludovico and Audi is like I think Italian who plays almost like classic but modern one right now.
I don't think I know who that is.
EIN Audi. So it's like I just
I'll look it up and see.
okay. So we put it in the show notes whether it's similar or not, so I can imagine what you actually liked.
Yeah.
Okay. So you tried. Okay, you studied music, and you say you were not successful. What does it mean? You couldn't play piano, or you couldn't find a job?
Well, I knew that I wasn't going to be able to find a job because I wanted to play all the modern music, and in music school, at least at that time, the thought was that if you're going to study classical music, that means that you have to study Bach and Beethoven and Mozart.
Ah, okay.
And why do I want to hear the same Beethoven sonata for the 300th time? I mean, not to say I don't like Beethoven. He was a great innovator
Yeah.
and everything, but I wanted to play the more modern music. And at that time in music school, it was like, no, no, no. Well, maybe you can play that afterward, but you have to do all the modern. You have to do all the traditional music, and you have to play Mozart sonatas. And as I always say, they tortured me until I played a Mozart sonata, and I escaped soon afterward.
Could you play Mozart and all this stuff?
Yeah, sure, sure.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, as I
Okay.
said, my specialty was Scriabin. I played the late Scriabin sonatas. I played the White Mass and the Black Mass.
Okay. Yeah, cool. Can you still play it?
I haven't played in years, and I've recently been diagnosed with serious arthritis.
Okay.
So I'm afraid that ship has sailed in any case.
Okay. But you could play something on piano right now, right? Still. So it's some.
Sure,
Yeah, cool. Okay.
sure.
So then you were okay. So then you said, okay, music is nothing for me, and you are interested in technology. What happened then?
Well, there was a small school in Milwaukee. That it was one of these schools where they'll give you an abbreviated course. In this case, it
Hmm.
was 8 month course,
Hmm.
and then at the end they'll try and find you a job. It was one of those kind of places, and we had a very very intense period of instruction. I think only about a third of the people that started the class were able to finish it because it was just, I mean, it was really, really intense. And we were taught BASIC and
Hmm.
Cobol and RPG, but we also had classes in accounting and systems analysis and all the things that go with it. And they tried to squish all of that into 8 months. And
Not bad.
yeah, well, like I say, it was very stressful, but those of us who came out of it with jobs.
Okay. When was it roughly?
Oh, I went to school there in 1986. That was when I moved to Milwaukee to go to school there, and that's where I got my first job, and I've been here ever since.
In which year was it roughly?
When I started working in IT, you mean?
Yeah.
I went to school in 86. I got my first job in January of 87.
Oh, okay. And back then, how was it? No, the climate. So you could just get a job in IT, or was it really tough to get a job? So was it like right now, or different, or in
There,
like
these things go in waves, you know how it is. And at the time, there had been a period where if you knew anything about programming, you could get a job instantly. But then that wave started going down again. And around the time I started, it was not particularly easy to find a job as a programmer.
Mhm.
So I ended up taking a job as an operator on a
Okay.
very, very backward system. It was the company that I went to work for. This was in 1987. They were
Hmm.
still using punch cards.
Okay.
They didn't yet have any PCs. I think one of the accountants had a PC, and they didn't even have terminals on the desk. Everything was done with batch processing.
Okay.
So it was quite an old-fashioned environment to walk into. thinking that I was going to be in the greatest technology experience and adventure of my life, and then I set foot in this place and it's all punch cards and so forth.
Yeah, but punch cards, what you did as an operator, so how I can imagine. So what was it to do? It's like, restarting the computer, or what you could do back then.
I have a link that I can probably share with you. I have a picture of the card decks sitting in a drawer that we would use
Okay.
to run all the jobs, and they would all be the punch cards held together with rubber bands, and there would be these drawers full of decks of cards, and one would be for billing, and one would be for order entry, and one would be for receivables and so forth. And
Okay.
then, for example, if I ran the billing job stream, there were the room next to the computer room was data entry, and these gals were working on key punch machines with punch cards and so forth. And they would hand through the window, they would hand me this big stack of usually about 1,500 cards that were the input for the billing jobs. They had been
Okay.
punching this stuff all day long, and they'd hand it to me, and I'd put the first part of the deck in up to where it said execute program name, and right after that, all the cards would be loaded in, and then the rest of the job deck. So when it got to that point in the job deck, it would go, and all the cards would be read in.
How long you spent, with the punch cards?
Oh, it was awful because they'd come in unsorted, and they'd have to go in a sorting machine. And you can imagine a machine with 10 little hoppers, one for each digit, right? And you're sorting across several different columns, and then you have to sort within this column, within another column. So you have to make all these passes where these 1,500 cards would have to go through the machine. It was really, it was unlike anything we experience nowadays. I mean, to think that you're actually handling the data in your hands, right? We don't do that anymore.
Maybe handling merge conflicts, right? Something like this.
Yeah. And if you made a mistake on the sorter, there was nothing you could do to recover. You'd have to just stack all the cards up and start over.
Okay, got it. What was the company about? Was it like insurance?
No, I worked for Wyco Group Incorporated, which was men's footwear. And I think part of the reason I got the job is I had worked in a shoe factory before that. So I
Okay.
knew the business. And since I already knew the business, all I had to do was learn the computers.
Yeah, you had at least 8 months of intense training, so it worked
Yeah.
well. So what happens after the shoe experience?
That got me into programming because in those days, when an operator had a problem, you'd have to call the programmer, and he'd come in, diagnose it, make a fix, rerun the program, whatever had to be done. And I just hated that because I'd have to call the guy, and then he'd come in an hour later wearing his shorts or whatever and go, "Oh, let me fix this," and I just want to finish my job and go home, right? I just want to
Yeah.
finish my shift. And so I started watching what the guys were doing, and everything was written in assembly language. All of
Okay.
our stuff was written in-house in assembly language at the time. So I would say to the programmers, I'd come in the afternoon when they were finishing their shift, and I'd have a little while to talk to the guys, and I'd say, "Well, how did you find out what the?" Oh, and then they'd say, "Look, here's the core dump. If you take the core dump, this is where this is the load address of the program, and then you go to the listing and you say, okay, here's the instruction that failed. Subtract that from the address, and then you can look up in the core dump and see where the data that was being accessed was." And 99 times out of 100, it was just an error in data entry where there was a blank that should have been a zero. 99 times out of 100 it was a blank instead of a zero. And so I'd look at the code and I'd get a listing, and I'm not going to call the programmer and wait an hour for him to come. And so I'd go in and patch the program myself, that if it got a blank instead of a zero, it would just reject that card with a note or whatever. Then I would take the listing, circle the problem in red, put it on the programmer's desk for the next morning, and then they'd figure it out. And then the next morning I'd come to work and the guys would go, "You fixed that yourself?" And I'm like, "Well, it was nothing. It was just this, And so soon afterward, I was invited to become a programmer on the day shift.
Okay, but you had no idea about assembly, right?
Well, I was trying to learn it on my own. right?
Okay.
And if you've never learned assembly language before, it's a daunting task.
Yeah, of
Anybody
course.
can tell you that.
This is what I meant. I mean, it's really hard to learn it actually.
Yeah, and this wasn't like any simple assembly like Intel or even 6502 or something like that. We're talking about IBM 370 assembler, essentially mainframe assembler language. And it was really hard. But the guys helped me, and I learned little by little, and eventually I was coding, and then we eventually got a Cobol compiler. Oh wow, modern language, Cobol, and then it went on from there. And by the late 90s, we had enough different machines. We had the IBM machines. We were first running a 4331, and then later on we got an AS400. And that was what the company's main business ran on. But here, in the meantime, we had the warehouse software, which had been upgraded to run on a Novell server. So here we have warehouse software running on a Novell server. The rest of the
Was
company,
NetWare, I guess, right?
Novell,
NetWare.
yeah, Novell NetWare, right? And it was written in BASIC, running on PCs. But the rest of the company's business is running on these IBM AS400s. So how did we get the two to talk to each other? Oh Lord! And we had all these terrible little things we came up with, like flag files and stuff like that. And finally, I was reading an article about this promising new programming language called Java that can talk to any machine, write once, run everywhere. And I thought, well, gee, we should try that. And I brought Java into the company probably around 97, I think. Very early on. Yeah, very early on.
97 was actually Java with JIT. So this was Java 1.1.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I will never forget, because I started prior to this with JDK 1.0. And with Java 1.1 came out. So I think with Java 1.1 we got interfaces, JDBC, and the JIT compiler. And I really enjoyed that because I had, because it ran much faster on my machine than the 1.0. So I really enjoyed that. And interesting. So and also interesting is that I also started back then, or started one of my projects. I had to use Novell on NetWare, and my clients wanted to run Java on Novell. And and I still remember this NDS, Novell Directory Services. And I had to write a Java program which accessed the NDS. And I thought, sure, we can do this. But what I completely underestimated is how the data structures inside Novell, because there was no string. They had a specific Novell strings, even to access a simplistic, LDAP structure was really painful. But I managed to do this. So and Novell was big on Java back then. So I attended Novell conferences. I still have, the CDs from Novell, the red ones with NDS, and I remember even. You remember BA WebLogic, right?
Yeah.
And there was a Project Tenga. Project Tenga was prior to WebLogic, and I think it ran on Novell. Because at the Novell conference, the BA guys were there and tried to sell it. So this was my short Novell story from back then. And NDS, I still remember Novell Directory Services, NDS, SDK for Java, which I used a lot. And and Novell was big because of printing back then. This was the main reason. They were really good at managing printers. And this is how we had to use Novell, because all companies, and of course TCP/IP stack. So I remember back then, Novell could do TCP/IP, but Windows couldn't. And this was one of the reasons why we had to use Novell. So this was my short excursion to Novell.
Well, that's really interesting, because I never knew that Novell supported Java.
Oh.
And, on the other hand, like I say, our business basically had two sides, and the warehouse side was running on Novell, and the main business side was running on AS400. And IBM's support for Java on the AS400 was absolutely superb. It always has been. They were, as we all know, very early adopters for Java. But we were able to connect to the AS400 from PC servers running Linux, and we were able to do all of the native stuff on the AS400, multi-member files, data queues, all the stuff that's unique to that machine, we were able to do from PC using Java because of IBM's support. because IBM's support for Java on the 400 was so great. I mean, it's absolutely unbelievable. It's just like being right on the machine. You can do anything you want. Fantastic stuff.
I put it in the chat, and I will put it in the show notes. I found an article about that, and it is from 1997, Java and NDS integration. This was, and the cool story is I had 2 days to implement this because there was a huge conference in Germany, or it was called Systems. It was huge, and it was so huge that there was problems on the highway to reach the conference. And so this is what I really remember this, and I give you the and that they are no advertising here, the 100% pure Java API, and interesting, a piece of history. So yeah, and this is what I used on Novell, but I didn't enjoy that because it was kind of Java, but it was really low level.
I look forward to reading that.
Yeah, you brought Java into the company. So what's your opinion about Java? I mean, from assembly to Java is a huge step, right? I mean, I don't know in which direction, but it's crazy.
Well, the whole thing with Java, it just made it seemed to make the individual machines go away. When you're writing the old style, whether it's assembly language or any other sort of high level languages, you're always thinking about the machine. And when you're writing Java, you're not thinking about the machine. You're thinking about the data. You're thinking about how it's going to get to the other machines and so forth. You're not thinking about the machine itself. That just changed everything.
Did it change? Because for me it was like, a fake statement. Because okay, the Java virtual machine is a virtual machine, but we have to install the machine first, and then we are portable. So for me it was like, I didn't like the idea. So okay, I have to install a software first, and of course if something runs on the software, then it's portable. So this is what I didn't like, because prior to Java I did C++, so I couldn't get the difference because C++ was everywhere. So I could compile with C++ and I could compile with Java. I had to install the C++ compiler, and I had to install Java. So for me it was not a lot difference between both. But I got the idea what JVM actually is a lot, I would say, maybe with JDK 1.2, a little bit later. I got really understood why it is important. But at the beginning, I didn't like the idea at all. What I also didn't like about Java was where the interfaces and there was no header files, there was no operator overloading. So it was for me somehow limited. And the Duke and the Applets, I said, okay, what the hell is going on with the old Applets? So at the beginning, I was really curious to know what's about Java, but I couldn't get the hype back then.
Yeah,
somehow I felt that this is important, but I didn't understood why, right? So this was my and what I really like about Java was the Java coffee logo, because I really like coffee. So for me, this was the most appealing stuff about Java was the coffee relation.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of gimmicky at first too. I mean, I saw the possibilities of it,
yeah.
even though we weren't actually seeing them concretely, because some of that stuff had to wait for the better compilers and stuff like that. But the whole business with the applets and the little applets in a browser and everything, that just seems so silly to me. I mean, it's like, this is what we're going to use this powerful language for?
Yeah.
And the business with the applets running in a browser, I think that could have been something, but you know what it would have required? It would have required hot Java to be successful, which was the browser written in Java. And there is no way that could have happened, because at the time Java was not sophisticated enough, it wasn't fast enough, it couldn't have happened. So that meant then now, just like you said before, we had to have a JVM for every machine, every operating system we wanted to run it on. Now you needed essentially a JRE for every browser you're going to run it in as well, and then that just starts getting ridiculous.
I liked actually hot Java. I experimented with it, but interesting. Ice faces.
Yeah. We used ice faces at work.
Yeah, and the ice faces people had a Java browser. This is how they started.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, it was the ICE browser. So you could use the ICE browser, and this was their main business from them. So they could sell, a custom browser with company branding.
Well, isn't that interesting? I never knew about them until they came up with their JSF components.
And now listen, if you build a browser, you have to be really good in parsing HTML.
Yeah.
And this is how they got, the incremental updates in JSF. Because if you're building a browser, you parse HTML, you have the Java representation. If you do JSF, you have to do the same, right? Mm-hmm. So you are parsing the JSF representation into kind of a DOM tree. And if something changes in the browser, you have to partially update, the parts which change on the server. And this is why they were so good at the beginning. This was interesting,
Yeah, they were doing stuff with JSF1 that nobody else could really do.
Yeah, because of the ICE browser.
When 2 came out, it was all, then everybody could do it, and it didn't matter anymore.
Yeah, and the problem with them, they in one point of time they forked, I think, prime faces, which was a mistake, because they even forked the wrong branch, as far as I know. But ICE browser.
Yeah, I remember that. In matter of fact, I was at Java 1 right after that happened, and caught a picture of those 2 guys talking. I still have it somewhere. They looked very serious. Ice Faces guys and Tugtag.
That's interesting. What I found right now is a Java doc documentation of the ICE browser from IceSoft, was the name of the company, from Oracle. So I put it to show notes. So this is even more interesting. I put it to the chat right now. So yeah. So this is what I don't understand right now. But it seems like Oracle used either license or used the ICE browser. Okay, Glenn, this is one of the most historic shows in the AirHacks.fm history. So we have to investigate now the ICE browser, why Oracle knows about the... And ICE browser extends Java X Swing J panel, implements HTML browser, and, of course, implements as well Java Beans property change listener. This is about ICE browser.
We're discovering the secrets of the universe.
This is because of the astrology, I think you mentioned. This was. So, what was your first project with Java? So, your first something working project, if you can remember. Then, what you did for the company. It was always interesting how you start with and.
Yeah, I do remember that actually. I figured out how to write a web app. And in those days, that meant, emitting all the HTML yourself from a servlet. But I figured out how to do that, and I was kind of playing around with it. I hadn't even showed anybody.
You read the O'Reilly book about servlets back then?
I read
with
one
the
of
kettle.
them. There were so many, I don't know which ones I wrote, which ones I read, but yeah, I had some of those books. I had a really heavy bookshelf at work that was always in danger of tipping over.
So you generated HTML with servlets for the work.
Oh yeah, and at that time the big app that we needed was a SKU lookup. So if you know the UPC number, you can look up the model number and the color and everything else, and all this looking up back and forth. And I thought
a hash map, right?
Well, just to get the UPC number.
No, back then it was a hash table, of course, but now we
hash table.
Hash
I thought you said hazmat. Yeah, it was like that. And so I wrote a little web app where you could key in like a stock number and get the UPC number, or vice versa, and get a little information. And I thought, oh, this looks clever. And I showed it to the boss, and he was just floored by it. He thought, how could you do this? This is amazing. And to me, it was just, well, this is just this. I'm just playing around with this little thing I found, And he said, okay, we have to write some more of this. We have to do some more of this. And pretty soon we were doing that kind of thing on PCs. And we had also barcode applications that needed to be done. Yeah. And so there was a lot of that. And Java just became more and more useful for all of this stuff. The really climactic application, I think, was the one for our factory. We had a factory in a different town further away up, and it was called Beaver Dam. And up in Beaver Dam was a factory where some of our shoes were still made in this country, and they had to ship them to our warehouse, and our warehouse was checking those in and inspecting them just like everything else. Which was
Are they leather shoes, nice shoes, or what? How I can imagine your shoes? So was it like high end?
Yeah, men's dress shoes. Yeah.
Okay, so high end shoes.
High end shoes, right? And so they were doing all this extra wasteful work just to that was we already knew the shoes were good because our own factories made them, right? We didn't need to inspect them over again. So we worked out a system where as they were packing the shoes, they would scan the barcodes that were printed by my barcode program. And then once they had a whole skid of shoes finished up, they would scan a different barcode and it would send the data from the factory out in Beaver Dam over the phone lines to the AS400 in Milwaukee. And then when that pallet of shoes arrived at our warehouse in Milwaukee, they would just scan it once and all the information would flow. So then we didn't have to do any extra work for our own product that we were making ourselves, as opposed to the stuff that was made overseas from China, India, wherever.
This would be even cool right now, the application. I mean, this was back then, it was crazy. When was it? 2000?
Yeah, early 2000s when we were doing all this stuff. And we were able to use Java for all of this. Another really interesting thing we did was we had a device in the warehouse called a Cubiscan. And
Wait a second. Which server you used back then? Server. Was it Java web server?
Which app server you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, we started with Tomcat.
Okay.
And we used that for a few years, and then we switched to Glassfish.
Okay.
And they were still using Glassfish at the time I retired, but shortly after switched to, I talked to the guys recently, and they said they've been running Pyara for some time.
Hey, cool.
Yeah.
And which IDE you used back then at the beginning?
Oh, that's a story. In the earliest days when we were doing Java, we just used a text editor. A text editor and Java C, the Java files.
But which one? Notepad or UltraEdit, or what was it?
Well, I was using just some text editor that came with Linux. We were using early versions of KDE at the time, and they always ship with some kind of little text editor. I don't know what it was, some nameless text editor that is probably best forgotten. But we didn't have any revision control or anything.
Mm-hmm.
Then we heard about this Java IDE that in fact was written in Java, and it was called NetBeans. And I thought, well, we have to try this out. And we tried it out, and again, these were the early days of Java, and the early versions of NetBeans were just, the earliest versions of it were just not even usable. But it looked so fascinating because it was so infinitely customizable. It just looked like it was really going to be a good product someday. And sure enough, by and by, Java got better and NetBeans got better. And one day I took a look at it and I said, you know what? We're going to use this. And I switched us to NetBeans and we used it, until I retired. And they're probably still using it. I don't even know.
Yeah, I also wanted to use NetBeans, but at the beginning I didn't like it at all. And the reason being is that it was somehow proprietary at the beginning. So what I remember, there was not even class path. So I had, to mount jars, which I really hated. So it was like the entire concept was strange. And so I started with Java Studio Workshop from Sun, Semantic Visual Cafe, use a lot, Ball and JBuilder. Try to avoid Visual H for Java because it was slow, but I liked the look and feel. So I really like how it looked, but it was hard to get. So I don't know whether it was possible to buy for me. There was a website actually. Do you remember Programmer's Paradise? Or was it a German thing?
I remember the name.
Yeah, you could buy IDEs from there, and Visual H for Java was hard to get. I really wanted to try Code Warrior from a company called Metroworks, actually. But I never got it, so this is also an interesting one. And I was, I think version 2, I had a license from JetBrains, IntelliJ, also liked, the look and feel. And NetBeans tried to avoid. So I started with NetBeans really with the version 5. And from the version 5, I use it all the time. But prior version 5, it was ugly and didn't work well. And I was forced, but because I delivered courses for Sun Microsystems from time to time, so they wanted me to use NetBeans. But even in the courses, I didn't use NetBeans. So I was more like guerrilla teacher or trainer.
We started using it a little earlier. We were using, I think, version 3.
Okay.
And yeah, it wasn't as good in the earlier days, but I think you're right. Around 4 or 5, it really started getting good, and after that, it
Yeah,
just
really good. And 6 was even better. It was completely refactored. It was a lot faster. It's complete refactoring. Okay, so and how you found NetBeans was like evaluation, or what's the deal? So because I really liked all the IDEs, and for me back then NetBeans was the worst. So this is what my conclusion back then. So I'm curious why you use NetBeans so early.
I've always been a big open source guy, right? And
Okay.
I will tell you that I did not have the best opinion of Microsoft in those days, for example.
Sure.
And in fact still don't, but that's another story. But I wanted to, and there were problems at the time, for example, with Microsoft wanting to make their own JVM and change
Yeah,
things.
J++ and Visual Studio. Yeah.
So I was always very, very aware of the idea that Java must be pure. It must always be kept pure.
Yes.
That means being actually written in Java, I thought to myself, well, you can't get more pure than Java written in Java, and a Java IDE written in Java. So that was the thing that attracted me to it. You couldn't co-opt it. You couldn't make it into something proprietary because it was written in Java. You'd have
You're
to
right.
change the JVM. Right?
But Java Studio code was also written in Java by Sun Microsystems, I think. So it was. I still have a CD.
Yeah, that I never tried. I don't think I ever saw it.
Yeah, I liked it actually. So I will try to find it. So I will show you.
Did they use code for that when they bought NetBeans?
No. So NetBeans
No.
was developed in Czech Republic, in Prague, a different team, and they bought the entire team. And the interest, I don't know who actually started with Java Studio Workshop. And I think there was a workshop for C++ and for Java, but I'm pretty sure it was pure Java, how it looked and felt like. So maybe there was some native parts, but the appearance, it looked like AWT. So it was, and there was Java Studio Creator, which was more interesting. So Java Studio Creator back then do you remember Beanbox? Glenn,
No.
are you a Java programmer? You had a leather jacket with Java logo on it, the most expensive jacket from Java 1, and you don't remember Beanbox.
Some of the stuff you're saying, I remember hearing the names, but I just don't remember what they were.
Yeah,
Beanbox.
the Beanbox was integrated IDE for Java Beans inside JDK. What I would try to do is actually we have to download early Java version and launch it. I will be really interested. It's called Beanbox, and Java Studio Creator, or Java Studio Creator was like Beanbox on steroids. So you had Java beans, and you could use pipes to connect them, and it was more like what happens behind the scenes was dependency injection. So you can wire up without any code, so low code environment for Java beans, and this was 2000.
Wow. That sounds pretty advanced.
Yeah, and I have a license, so I bought. This is another story. I actually funny one. So I was huge Sun fanboy in Germany, and I wanted to have the Java Studio Workshop with Java Studio Creator, but the only way to get it, you have to become a Sun client, right? So I called Sun and said, okay, I would like to apply to be Sun client. And what I became was a Sun Enterprise client. They sent me a book with all the Sunfires and Sun Enterprise E10K or whatever, and I think the book was more expensive than the two IDEs. I had multiple interviews via phone. I was completely back then. I think I was student. I was completely confused. Why they calling me and I get all the books? I just would like to have an IDE, right? And right now it was like 200 euros. It was exactly 200 euros. And then I got the CDs, so I still have them. And but then I got, I don't know how it's called, like approval, so I could actually buy anything from this catalog. And the catalog was huge, so I could actually order servers or whatever. So I got regularly, the catalogs from all the Sun servers. It was a nice book, and I said okay. And then I got after years that what happened is they did the interview with me, that I became the enterprise client, and now I could order everything. But what I actually wanted only have is the IDE. So I would say I was the youngest student, maybe the youngest enterprise client from Sun Microsystems in Europe, maybe, right? So this was a
But
crazy
they
ride.
just went ahead and sent you all that stuff.
I only got the 2 CDs, so I still have them. It's this Java Studio. Actually, on one Christmas show, I started the CDs on a Windows machine, and it was really fast because after 15 years, the hardware evolved, and I will try to do it again. It was actually fun. Maybe we'll run on some Java. Yeah. Sorry, this was my Java Studio Workshop experience, and yeah.
Well, there was another IDE that was part of the roots of NetBeans too, wasn't it? Forte for Java?
Yeah, Forte for J is like another company some bought. It was its code generation. And the Forte for J was, I think, at the end, a plugin for NetBeans, this is my understanding. And there was Forte for J, and I think it was NetBeans was plugins. This was my understanding.
But some of the Forte code was merged into NetBeans, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah. So that the NetBeans was used as a platform, and Forte became like a set of plugins.
Mm-hmm.
No, but the interviews about you are absolute. I forgot actually about that. So the
well, I wanted to say too. You mentioned Visual Age for Java before. Mm-hmm. I have some history with that too.
Really? What happened?
We were going to use it at work. Right. Mm-hmm. This is around the time we were evaluating NetBeans and deciding to use NetBeans as an IDE. Before we did that, we looked at Visual Age because we were an IBM shop. So, well, of course, we have to do it the IBM way, right? And that was the most disastrous, horrifying experience I've ever had as a programmer. I went down for training in Chicago. And even the teacher couldn't figure it out. I've got a picture that was a screenshot from one of those classes. I should post some of these pictures later. Let me just write this down here. And well, you used it, right? So I mean, you know what those diagrams look like, where you're drawing lines between everything instead of writing code.
I never used the lines. So what I use is Visual Age for Java. The only problem was the Envy repository. Because what I didn't like in Visual Age for Java, you never saw the entire source code. You only could see a single method. So I was really confused. So this is what I didn't like at all. And our project became so big that the Envy became too slow. And it was the end of Visual Age for Java. But it worked actually surprisingly well. But we used the visual editor for Swing without events. Just to draw, the Swing parts. And this worked actually surprisingly well. It worked really well back then.
If you tried to do the whole thing that way,
whole thing was no way.
And everything else,
no,
horrible, absolutely horrible. Scarred me for life.
The cool story is I also had a training at IBM. I was forced to 1-day training because a company implemented their own version control system, which is suspicious already. But they did it, and I was forced to attend the training, and I asked a single question. I forgot actually what it was. And the trainer responded, if I knew the answer, I wouldn't be forced to stay here and deliver the training. I could actually program some code. and I remember this actually because if for a joke, I delivered also some trainings. If someone asked me the first question, I sometimes said this, in my workshops, and everyone was afraid. So what he's talking about, and then everyone was laughing because I told the story. But this is my only training I actually attended was back then, and I remember still. He said, Okay, now Visual Age for Java. You couldn't draw the lines, so you used NetBeans, right? So this was the short story.
Short story, yeah.
So you spent the entire career in the shoe factory?
Yes, mm-hmm. I stayed in that business. I worked for the same company 27 years.
Cool. That's actually and you enjoyed the experience, so that you can stay so long for a company, or is it usual, unusual? So because it is for US, it's highly unusual that you spend your entire working for a company, right?
It's an unusual company. They're family owned, and they're known for being a very good place to work.
Okay.
And What I always say, it's a filthy rich company that takes care of their own, and they took care of me.
Cool. And so maybe then, so usually I ask, what you did then and what you did then, and my you know my partners here at AHEX FM, tell me about all the projects. But maybe more interesting here in your case, what is the migration story? So you started with JDK 1.0, I think 1.1, and you migrated to at the end what, Java 11?
Well, we were looking at every possible upgrade to Java as they were coming out. But one of the problems was that we were using so much Linux, and the Java story on Linux at that time was not quite as happy as it was on other operating systems. I don't know if you remember Blackdown Java.
Not only remember, Johann Voss is actually the creator of Blackdown. He was a guest on the AHEX FM, so we had a chat about that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you have to listen to it.
That. And at one point, and I think IBM had one too, at one point I think there were 3 different JVMs for Linux, and we were trying one and trying another, and this one seems to work best. We'll use this one in the warehouse, we'll use this one in the factory and stuff, and it just got really out of hand. But around the time of Java, probably 4, I think, then things really started to settle down and swing worked
1.3. What I remember, Java 1.3 was the official, I think, Sans supported Java version with still Blackdown mentioned, because I remember this Blackdown. And with JDK 1.3 within the hotspots, this is when it ran really well on Linux. And prior to this 1.2, I also remember 1.3 was like the breakthrough, which we used in production 1.2 on Linux, and then 1.3. Actually, we always use Java on Linux, as I remember. From the beginning, at the very beginning was Windows, but all other companies was actually Linux. So it was Windows was very rare. What I wanted to ask you about Java and the company. What's the name of the company again?
Wyco Group Incorporated. Excuse me, WEYCO.
Oh, Wyco. You were one of the first Java programmers there?
I was the first Java programmer. I brought Java into the company.
And how many programmers were, after 27 years? So it was like a huge Java department, or?
No, actually we had a very small IT department, and we hired some programmers later on. But once we started doing the web stuff, which was all Java, that was split off into a different team, and I was made leader of that team. But we only had a few programmers. We wrote our own. We eventually did a lot of web stuff. We wrote our own e-commerce suite with 3 programmers and 2 web developers. That's all we had.
This is actually crazy. And what software run on Java in the company? So which kind of software you wrote? So with the barcodes was first one, right? So it was the barcode scanning and quality assurance. And what else? Which software were there in the company? Software parts.
Well, there were other programs that were used just to try and get things back and forth from one machine to another. So, for example, when we accepted an order on the web, that would obviously have to go into the database immediately, but that was not exactly the same information that you would find on the AS400 where the order entry system was. So those two had to be kind of massaged, and there was an order class and an order class and all this kind of stuff. But we were shuttling things back and forth between machines that normally didn't talk to each other, and that was the great value of Java for us.
Mm-hmm. But the software was critical to the company, right? The ordering, everything run through Java.
Yep. More and more stuff over the years came to run on Java, and you'd have I don't want to say the old-fashioned, but the traditional programmers working on order entry and receivables and everything else. And they're doing their RPG and stuff and doing whatever they need to do. And if we need to access their stuff, we say, hey, can you show me where I can find the file layout for this? What happens when you do this? And then we implement it in Java. And what I would really have liked to see is that going in both directions. Some of the RPG programmers learning some Java too, but that wasn't going to happen. What happens a lot of times, I think, with newer programming languages like Java, you get the guys that know Cobol and RPG, they're not going to change. They already know what they need to know. They don't feel they should have to learn anything new, right? So that made it a little more difficult because the guys in my team, we were the Java guys and nobody else knew anything about it. So if there was any problem, we had to solve it ourselves.
I interrupted you because as we started to talk about the scanning, you mentioned a device, and I say, okay, wait a second, and then we didn't cover it. So something is,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah, that was an interesting one. Um, yeah, this device is called a Cubiscan. And
hmm
what it is, it's a flat metal plate with some metal arms that stick up from it. And what it does is you put a box or a package on it, and it measures it in 3 dimensions using ultrasound.
okay,
Okay, so there are 3 ultrasound emitters, one for each dimension, and you put the box sort of in the corner, and it just goes bzz, 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 measures the dimensions, and then you know how big the box is. Well, we use that uh, because different products require different sized boxes, and sometimes we'd have different boxes coming from a manufacturer in India or China decides to start using a different box, and that affected us because the warehouse system, once it assembled an order, needed to say to the operator, "Go grab a size 14 box for these." And the only way it would know is if it knew what size boxes were going in the big carton. And the only way we would know that is if we measure them when they come in, when they're received in the warehouse. So we had a Java program that was running on a PC connected to this Cubiscan, and the operator would come and scan the barcode on the pair of shoes, and that would read into the AS400 and say, okay, here are the measurements we have on file. But the Cubiscan just measured a different set of measurements. This box is slightly different. Would you like me to put these measurements in on file? And the operator would say, oh, yes, we have a new size box. Okay, put that in. So now that information is on the AS400, and when shoes get up to the sorting routine upstairs where everything's put in the boxes, it knows what size boxes to put in. But again, all of that was done in Java, a PC program that scans that reads the keyboard with a scanner and then talks to the AS400, gets this data, then goes and talks to the warehouse systems and says, here's what you need to know. And again, Java was just the centerpiece of all of this, and it was a lot of smaller programs that ran on PCs and did that kind of connectivity work. But that's absolutely invaluable when you have big disparate systems like that with different large components like warehouse and office.
so okay, now you made me curious. So what was the, how to call it, biggest disaster happened, in the factory with Java? So like a garbage collector who caused all the shoe boxes to be thrashed or whatever. So
Uh, I don't know that we really had any big problems. When you say a big Java problem, I don't think any of everybody has a problem from time to time and everybody has stories, but I don't think any of ours are really related to Java. They're related to human error, I think.
Cobol and RPG, I guess, right? So this was always
It's all the fault of RPG.
yeah.
Actually, the best disaster story I have has nothing to do with code. We just had gotten a brand new AS400, and
Uh-huh.
you know what those cost, right? And there was this little kind of, the back of the machine had a sort of plastic cover on it that was hinged. And I thought, oh, I wonder what's behind there. And we had already fired it up and we had IPL'd it and it was running. And I just kind of went and tilted that little thing open to see what was behind there. And the machine shut down. The whole AS400 just instantly shut down. And it took about a half an hour to bring it up because it had to revalidate all the disk storage and
Okay.
everything.
And what was behind now? Can you tell it?
Oh, I don't know, little boxes and stuff.
Some dwarfs.
Yeah, so nothing important. Nothing that was worth seeing by bringing the company's business down for half an hour.
Okay. Well, you also mentioned Glassfish, so I think then you use a little bit of Java E then, right? Or
Yeah, a lot of Java EE and Glassfish. We really liked Glassfish, and I was on a lot of mailing lists and so forth, and I found that the people at Sun that worked on Glassfish were really anxious to help, and
Yeah.
I got in email conversations with the people that were working on the code, and they said, "Oh, try this," you know. So that's what I liked about working with Glassfish, but it did have its issues, and we were very glad to get on Pyara when the time came.
Hmm.
Or at least I think that was after I left, but I was very glad to get on it for my own projects, that's for sure.
But this is incredible. So I mean, you use actually Java from the beginning. You had a lot of migrations to the recent Java. To a team of 5 people, and you ran the entire company on Java, Glassfish, and NetBeans. So it is
Well,
incredibly productive.
that's a bit of an exaggeration because they did have, half a dozen RPG programmers and they had
Okay.
some other people doing other stuff, but as far as the Java stuff, yeah, it was just my team and it was like 5 of us.
Yeah, but lines of code, I would say, can you estimate how much Java code was
I,
there? Thousands. I mean,
no, millions because of the e-commerce suite that we wrote.
okay.
That the other stuff was, yeah, hundreds of thousands of lines of code, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. But that e-commerce suite, that was millions of lines of code.
But it's incredibly productive because if I think about this, no, nowadays with 5 people, it would be still crazy to write such a system with the most modern tools we have with clouds and who knows what. And maybe you will even with all the DevOps movement and YAML even need more people than back then. So it's interesting actually. Hey Glenn, listen. What I would like to do is I would like to re-invite you back and then talk with you about something I have not that much idea. It's about C64 and retro programming and whatever, maybe even astrology. So, what do you think about this? Should we do this?
Sure. Sounds like fun.
Yeah. Where people can find you?
I have a website at lionlabs.org. That's Lyonlabs, and there's a lot of good Commodore information on there, including the page I think you've seen with all the compilers and operating systems.
And
And I'm also on Twitter as G Holmer.
G. Holmer. What I also remember is we had the conversation about the IDEs, and I used an editor, and I forgot the name, and I just tried to think about it, and I found it right now. It is JEdit. You know JEdit?
Yes, in fact, I said before that we were using some nameless text editor before we used NetBeans, but that's not 100% true. I remember that we were using JEdit towards the end, just before we switched to NetBeans, and yeah, we loved it. We loved it. I still use it to this day.
Yeah, and I will just download it and see whether it still works. So I remember back then it was really really fast back then on my machine, but it
Fast and with an amazing number of plugins because it had a whole
yeah.
community around it. Yeah. And the guy who wrote it, when it was first written, the guy was just a teenager, I think.
Oh, interesting. So with that, I would say I will invite you back in a few months and would like to talk about you, your story behind what you do after 27 years of Java. Hopefully now a little bit Java as well. Still Java? Are you doing
Sure.
still Java now or no?
Yeah, I'm still doing some Java. I wrote a GUI Gopher client for the Commodore 64 that has a corresponding Gopher server, a specialized Gopher server that's written in Java.
Oh, this is
So
the
I
topic
could-
for the next session.
Yes.
Using Java together with C64.
See,
So, no,
Java
this is-
runs everywhere.
The future of Java is C64. This will be the topic
right.
of our of our next session, right?
And you know what? There is actually a JVM for the Commodore 64. It doesn't do much. It's called Nano VM, but there is one.
Very good. It was really. I think we met several times at Java 1, but we never had the time, for such a deep conversation, right? So what is really what I enjoy about the podcast because we can spend some time have a chat, and a Java 1 is really diverse. You have you have no time for anything, right?
Yeah, there's never time for long conversations at Java 1. You go to parties and stuff, and
Okay, cool. Thank you a lot.
All right, thank you for inviting me, Adam.